Welcome back to a very special episode of the Done Deal Show with myself, Terry Flewers, and Ben Jacobs. Manchester United is up for sale. Billionaires and trillionaire organizations are reportedly in the running, already making inquiries towards buying Manchester United Football Club away from the Glazers. We're going to delve into all the details for you now live on the air from one of the best in the business, Ben Jacobs. But first of all, my friend, how are you?
Very good. Enjoying this 4 World Cup games a day routine, but there's not much time for anything else, including walking the dog even.
I know it is difficult. I'm sort of trying to plan games in between picking the kids up from school. There's obviously the Glazer news. There's been the Ronaldo news. There's been some big transfer news in the last few days. There's just no room in the cycle to kind of fit it in. It's an absolute sandwich. But there we go. And as we say, massive news broke 4 or 5 days ago now that the Glazers are looking to potentially sell. There's still a little bit of confusion for people. They heard one of the Glazers, I think it was Avram Glazer speak. One of the Glazers spoke. I don't know which one it was. I don't know the first. I actually don't know their first names. If you line them in a row, I wouldn't know which one's which. I just call them all the Glazers. I'm terrible. But he spoke about how they're looking for multiple ways as well as selling. What are you hearing? Is it likely to be a full sale in your opinion?
Yeah, my understanding is that their preference is a full sale, and Rain Group, who are overseeing the sale, don't see any problem with finding a suitor or a number, which is going to be equally as important to at least present them with options. And from there, it will be up to the Glazers. But what they won't necessarily want is to surrender a healthy minority percentage to a big name or company and then potentially have a dynamic that gives them a little bit less control and authority, unless, of course, they decide that they're in it for the long game. With some of these big organizations, and we'll find this as well with American investment with PSG, you might find that a known global company prefers actually to take a smaller slice of the pie with a view after things progress and as the market changes to potentially then taking a majority or 100% stake. So that's a kind of halfway house. And I'm not saying that anybody is actively exploring it at this point, but I know, talking to investor circles, that there are big businesses. Redbird Capital is another good example, that actually prefer to almost do a try before you buy approach, where they take a lower risk minority stake in a club that they believe can grow, and then over time they ask for a bigger stake or ultimately a majority stake followed by full ownership. But the challenge with Manchester United in that approach is that there's a real feeling that the Glazers, as I suppose Cristiano Ronaldo hinted as well, are not as invested as they were a few years back. And part of that is down to the failed Super League. Part of it is down to the pandemic. And the Chelsea sale, I think, has shown a lot of big ownership groups that now is the right time to sell. And that is why, in an ideal world, the Glazers' preference will be, as I understand it anyway, a full sale.
That's very good to hear. And for me, just someone that's like a lot of people that probably saw that statement that have worked in a corporate job, it was like a long-winded letter to say the club's up for sale. But of course, you don't go out and just say that, because of course you're trying to get the best deal possible. You don't want to appear desperate. You don't want to lower the valuation of the club in any way, shape, or form. I think Man United fans will be very happy with that indeed. Of course, there are many people linked to buying the club, and we're going to kind of go through them one by one for you, the viewers. So stay with us for it. The big name that's been connected for a long time, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Yesterday, it was announced that he would make a formal bid once the club is officially on the market. What's your understanding regarding Sir Jim, his bid, and the likelihood of him becoming the new owner of Man United?
Well, just before we come on to Sir Jim, because I think it's relevant, it's worth pointing out the process, because we're going to hear a lot about alleged bids and rival bids too. But this is not a fast process. Even a quick takeover is slow in terms of the time it will take. It's ultimately, at best, like having a kid. So 9 months would be a normal takeover without hitches. And nobody's entered into any kind of period of exclusivity. Nobody's done any due diligence. And the other key thing is Manchester United has been privately on the market for quite some time, on and off, putting feelers out there pretty much since the European Super League collapsed and the club didn't get a 1 billion bonus just for joining, which the Glazers were not necessarily banking on, but that would have been enough value, plus how that league developed, even though it was so unpopular, to keep them at the club because it was moving in a different direction. So they wanted the European Super League regardless of the U-turn, and that's because of the financial bounty that was at stake. And also that when they first joined, even though they embarrassingly had to change their stance, all of the Premier League clubs and the superpowers within European football were together and unified. So they were braced for a backlash, but together, and it fell apart very quickly. And just because the statement offers a public angle to all of this, it doesn't mean that from the perspective of Rain Group managing the sale and any prospective suitors, they will be alerted to it only because it's gone public and are suddenly huddling together and making offers. It's really important to stress that. It's not a transfer. So you don't just call up Rain Group if you have heard about it and say, we're interested, we'd like to offer X billion, let us know, thank you very much. It's a much more complex process. It is more rigid than people realize. So the only real difference between Chelsea and Manchester United is that Rain Group with Chelsea had to do things fast. And that was because Chelsea's very existence was under threat. And also, due to government involvement and Abramovich being forced out of the club, there was strict criteria, there was pledged investment, and it was about safeguarding Chelsea as well as selling it. Whereas with Manchester United, the Glazers can effectively just take the highest offer and have no real care as to who buys the football club. But the caveat to that is if they are genuinely exploring all options, they might end up working with whoever buys the club. And that's why I understand that within the process, there are quite clear guidelines. Non-credible suitors will be weaned out, and the price is kind of up for debate. And we might get a little bit of a bidding war, but there is a process to it. And even though the Glazers are not Roman Abramovich and Chelsea, there will be some similarities and some differences, as I've just outlined. So then as we talk about Sir Jim Ratcliffe, he has to abide by that process. And he hasn't done that with Manchester United to date, or during his time trying to hijack Clearlake Bowley and make a bid outside of Rain Group's process for Chelsea Football Club as well. And all of the noise, all of the fueling of rumours, and the fact that Ratcliffe is a lifelong Manchester United fan are one thing. So clearly he's going to explore the possibility, but he said this before. And he also said in October to the Financial Times that the club was not for sale. And in October, the Glazers were talking to other people privately before we knew about this in the public domain. And that kind of tells me that Ratcliffe is probably an outsider. He's not in the loop. This is a sale process made by Americans, largely for Americans. And Ratcliffe's going to have to kind of find a way of getting within the inner circle. And to do that, he also needs to show that he's prepared to meet the Glazers' valuation. And my understanding is that he's quite wary at the moment because it's a club that he desperately wants, but it's not at a price that he thinks is anywhere close to fair market value. And if it transpires, and especially with Liverpool up for sale as well, that there is a range of investors and suitors and groups that are prepared to get into a bidding war or see higher value in Manchester United, then even if Ratcliffe progresses, it will become a case of how high is he prepared to go. And I personally believe, unless he combines with another group, which could be a possibility, he won't go high enough. And that's why, even though it's being fueled, he continues now to say his focus is also on Nice. Whereas if you flash back a few months ago when the situation was less certain, he was much more bullish about wanting Manchester United. And now it's Manchester United is not for sale. I'm focusing on Nice. Suddenly it is for sale. So it's Ratcliffe's move. And I'm not sure at this stage that his valuation and the Glazers' valuation of Manchester United Football Club are going to be anywhere close.
And that makes a lot of sense. And when you start to move towards the other names heavily being linked with Man United from some credible sources now, the first of which got a lot of people excited. And I think the reason the excitement comes is because of the successes we've seen at Man City, the successes we've seen at PSG, and the radical turnaround of Newcastle. Money from the Middle East. There is Dubai that are looking to buy it, and that is I think it's the Investment Corporation of Dubai, which is essentially, as I understand it, that is sort of the most senior people, senior figures within that country. So essentially, it is the country Dubai buying it, as it were. What's the latest in terms of their approach and their attempt, considering they're not kind of US based, as you mentioned?
I mean, they are US based in the sense that a lot of their portfolio managers operate out of New York. So any transaction could have a dollar denomination. Naturally, the Middle East is going to be linked, but Investment Corporation of Dubai, pretty coy and silent at the moment. There's a lot of excitement. There's pure rumor out there that they've made a bid in excess of $10 billion, but that is not my understanding. And again, nobody really, unless they've been talking for months to Manchester United, will be at the point of making an offer. It doesn't quite work like that. You have a valuation from the outside in, then you get due diligence, and you have to match that valuation from the inside out and negotiate and debate with the club. So it is true that anyone can come forwards and say, this is our valuation. We are prepared to make an offer of X. And if that X is above market value, you've clearly got a starting point. And a organization like Investment Corporation of Dubai wouldn't have any real problems showing proof of funds. But there's not as much in this one as is currently being reported. And that's largely because in the MENA region, the focus is, yes, on sport, especially around a range of different visions heading up to 2030. You'll see this in the UAE, you'll see it in Saudi Arabia, you'll see it in Qatar as well. But they don't just throw money at things so far above market value for the sake of it. So they have to believe, therefore, what they pay is going to provide an investment. And that investment is, yes, financial, but also strategic. And one example of that could be the tourism that owning Manchester United generates. So an Investment Corporation of Dubai may be one to watch. They're a sovereign wealth fund established by the government of Dubai back in 2006. And their sole mandate is to manage various portfolios of investments. And under their key leadership is the Crown Prince of Dubai, Hamdan bin Mohammed Al Maktoum. And therefore, it will create a debate and perhaps a slight uncomfortableness amongst some Manchester United fans, like Newcastle, as you mentioned, Manchester City. Many will be excited by the sheer money, but the Premier League will once again have to do their due diligence. And the other thing to point out is Investment Corporation of Dubai don't have a great deal of experience within sport. And if they are involved in it, it's in a tangential sense or in a commercial capacity. And the final thing to say is just that there's politics. And within the UAE, the different emirates sometimes are unified and sometimes are separate. And with Manchester City being owned effectively out of Abu Dhabi, it might not sit right necessarily having Dubai ownership, especially with Arsenal's Emirates sponsorship as well. They're based in Dubai with Manchester United. And it's not to say that the Crown Prince of Dubai is going to say, okay, I won't buy Manchester United just because Abu Dhabi have got Manchester City. It's not quite like that, but it is important to understand that there is logistical, personnel, and commercial crossover between a lot of different senior figures, some of whom will be involved either officially or unofficially in some capacity with Manchester City or other projects in sport. And that's what makes it so difficult for the Premier League to do their due diligence when they look at the structure. But before anyone gets too excited about this, once again, Investment Corporation of Dubai have not tabled some bid that is billions above the market valuation or at the top end of what the Glazers might want. And when directly approached by me, at least, they have no comment at this stage. And that might be interesting because when you compare that to Liverpool, there were denials about Liverpool. With Manchester United, it's no comment at this stage. So they're one to watch. They obviously would have wealth, but I think it might divide the Manchester United fan base if they chose to proceed.
I think you're certainly right. It would divide people's opinion. Lots of people think very different things about money that comes to the Middle East. It creates a different debate, as to whether or not you think they're going to run the club well, which there's always the possibility billionaires don't run a club well. I think, though, when you're parting with this kind of money, that anyone who wants to make an investment knows that if you give 6 billion, let's just say that's what it comes out as in the wash, the only way you're making that money back is by furthering the club and making them more successful. It's not like the Glazers that bought the club cheaply on a leveraged debt deal, didn't put any of their own money in. Even if the project financially failed for them and they could only sell it for £1 billion, they still would have made £1 billion from essentially nothing. Very different with the way the structure is now. There are a few comments here that I want to do. The English media is concerned about United is because it will be they will be out of a job soon once we have some sane owners. No negative things to post about Manchester United is what Nabil says here. Super says the Glazers are playing with you all. I see a huge we tried, but our best to sell on its way. Watch this space. That's from a City fan who may just be a little bit worried that Man United could have good owners again. We will see. We've got some more super chats from Troy and Nabil will come back to in a bit. One of the big ones today, and I mean, there seems to be some big journalists talking about it. Apple. Of course, Tim Cook being the CEO of Apple, but Apple looking to buy Manchester United, and essentially, although they're a corporation, they are valued, or they have assets, as they say, are over $2 trillion. If they were looking to buy Manchester United, I'm sure that would include new stadiums and new tech, and everything would just be Apple. And I'm sure they would use Man United as essentially the biggest market employer ever to push Apple products. That would be part of it. But what's the latest as far as Apple and Tim Cook coming in and taking over at Manchester United?
Well, I think the thing to say about Apple, first of all, broadly, is that they have a huge appetite for investing in sports clubs as well as TV rights. And it's always been thought that their first venture into this area with an elite level club would be more in minority investment. And now there's the opportunity, certainly in the context of Manchester United, to talk to the club about both options, minority and majority investment. And I've always also been told that they're looking at other clubs around Europe to do exactly the same. And the difference with Apple or potentially Facebook or any of these so-called digital disruptors that have heavy online presences is that if you had ownership of a club, you would have the opportunity to exploit the club's own digital assets in a very different and innovative way. And I think it's very telling that those connected to Manchester United, and particularly Joel Glazer, I'm told, puts huge stock in the combination of this 1.1 billion fan base that was referenced with the potential of the digital assets. And with a partner like, say, Amazon, with the infrastructure to showcase Manchester United and run ads about Manchester United and sell things for Manchester United, and who knows, stream games for Manchester United. We know that Amazon already have some Premier League fixtures. All of that can provide a return on Amazon's buck. So from the outside in, you can understand why Amazon might see a strategic model for owning a big brand. And then from there, there'll be debates about things like conflict of interest. If they own Manchester United and then they're bidding for the Premier League rights, does that sit comfortably? But let's not forget, Nasser Al Khalifi is involved with beIN Sports, and beIN Sports air PSG games, including in the Champions League. And he's also the chairman of PSG. But naturally, QSI, the actual owners of PSG, and beIN Sports are not exactly the same. So there's a whole debate around there for further down the line, if anything progresses. But I think what's clear is that Amazon have had their interest piqued by investing in a football club in some capacity for quite some time. And it's very normal because they've been behind the scenes at clubs doing their documentaries, they've been airing football games. So what if they turn the tables and they actually owned a club? How can they commercialize that? And more so than ever, they would have more avenues to make a return. But one thing I want to add on all of this is that talking to people close to Amazon and also other investor groups, every single one says the same thing. And I think this is really crucial, that the price being quoted is way off. So if it turns into a bidding war, that's one thing. And if the Glazers allegedly want 8 billion, that's another. But that's never been my understanding. First of all, what you do is you set a price that's not a sale price, but it's a yardstick price. And that yardstick price is market valuation that can be assessed comparative to the Chelsea price, 2.3 billion, all the way up to a prospective valuation of Manchester United now or in the future. So the Forbes valuation of Manchester United in the current market is 3.9 billion. And then you can look at other clubs like Liverpool and say, well, if they are 3 billion, then we believe we're double that. So that's 6 billion. And then in addition to all of that, you can take the Glazers' equity, which was about 200 million of the 790 million that they paid, and you can value that now. And obviously, if you take 2 billion now in terms of dollars, so about 1.7 billion pounds, and you say that's what the original 200 million was worth, then you can ratio that to come to a valuation. And then if that's consistent with your Liverpool valuation and your Chelsea valuation, then you suddenly start saying, well, if what we paid in terms of the 200 million of equity from the 790 million is 10 times the valuation, and then if Chelsea's 10 times the valuation, and then if Liverpool is 10 times the valuation, then you start going 790 million times 10, and you get a massive, massive price. And that's all very neat, but you got to factor in things like the European Super League didn't happen. The club was financed on debt. It is not been in the Champions League for certain seasons gone by, and there's no guarantee of this season either. There are foundational issues. Ronaldo's just left. That will, like him or loathe him, have a value on the club. And from that 1.1 billion in terms of the fan base, how many of them are still following the club and how many are Ronaldo fans? And all of this can add towards the bottom line. So I think my point here is valuing the club is very difficult, but it's untrue when people say and Amazon's going to bid 8 billion, Dubai are going to table $10.3 billion, which is something in the region of 9.5 billion. This isn't correct, because the valuation of Manchester United is nowhere near that. And it's far more likely, certainly from sources I've spoken to, that there'll be a much smaller pool of interest when it comes down to the reality of the situation. One, because this isn't Chelsea at 2.3 billion. This is Manchester United at potentially 3 times that. And not everybody has that kind of money. But two, those inquiring at the moment may be interested and credible. And Amazon could easily fall into that category from what I understand. But once they hear the price, once they actually open the doors to Old Trafford, and that's where the Ronaldo comparison is really apt, that Cristiano Ronaldo walks into the football club and he says, I was really surprised that between my first and second spell, things had changed. Manchester United, I've said this before on the show, was like a shiny red Ferrari. And I went back there because I liked the shiny red Ferrari. And then when I opened the door, a bunch of McDonald's fell out and Harry Maguire was the driver. And I thought, yikes, what kind of car have I taken? And that is kind of the mentality of Ronaldo in essence. And I've made that terrible gag before. But if you are a prospective owner, it's genuinely the same, but without that humor and glibness, in the sense that you see this shiny red brand of Manchester United and you know it's special and you know it's big and you know it's got assets and you know it's got potential, but you don't actually know what's inside until you do your due diligence. And until you do your due diligence, you can't accurately assess a price.
And this is the thing, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of my good friends is a plumber and gas engineer. And he rang me up and said, I want to buy a business. Could you help me? Now, I'm not a business expert, but he said, I want you to take a look. And it looked like a good price for the amount of turnover and profit that it made. And he was buying everything. So the vehicles, tools, taking over the current contracts. But all I told him to do is get the contracts that are with local authorities reviewed by a lawyer. And when he got them reviewed, he decided not to buy the business, because under every contract this business had, it stated that if the ownership of the plumbing company, whatever they were called, Joe Blogg's Plumbing, if it changes ownership, all the tenders you've won could be subject to retendering. Meaning you could buy a business for £500,000 because of what it makes, but then lose all the contracts when they get retendered because you're a new owner. Then that business is worth absolutely nothing. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that price will get driven down. It then comes down to how much investment. I think where things might end up hitting maybe the 5-6 billions is total package. So the Glazers might walk away with 3.5 billion, but then there's a commitment, new stadiums, new training facilities, etc., etc., etc. It feels like that's where that may lie. But I think what's really encouraging for Man United fans, and I've tweeted a few things out, and what I love about Twitter, you do this very well. To be fair, I just don't have the in fairness, I don't have the dexterity in my fingers, let alone the vocabulary to always to do what you do. But you put something out like, we might get rich billionaire owners, our rivals are scared, and everybody says, well, United have always spent, so this is going to be no different. And I think what I would say to a lot of people right now is, we don't know who's going to own us, but the people that we're being linked to are serious. And yes, some of them are going to have shareholders to respond to. Yes, some of them are in this to make a profit at some point in the future. They're an investment company. There may be one or two that buy it purely because they love Manchester United. But when you're parting with £5 or £6 billion and you want to make that asset grow, you can only do that by making the football team successful. And no Man United fan really worth their salt has ever complained about the amount of money spent 2004, 13, 14 until now. There was a complaint in those sort of the latter years of Fergie that we weren't spending enough money, but the new TV deal came in and United started spending the same as everybody else. Our biggest issue has been who's run the club. Commercially, it's been run fairly well, but those commercial elements are fading because we're not winning on the football pitch. And no one is going to buy it without being aware of that. None of let's just keep it away from Dubai for a minute that don't have experience in sport. Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Apple, Amazon, they're not going to, these are some of the most successful businesses on the world, on the planet. And equally, when you look at them, they hold themselves to a very high degree on being successful, being the best. They're not going to buy a club like Man United and then just be happy for it to come forth. They'll want Man United to be the best team in the world. So I think Man United fans should feel an element of excitement. Don't get overly carried away because we don't quite know who's going to own it. But I think it's definitely going to get better than the Glazers, because I can't see somebody parting with that amount of money just to make it go backwards and then to lose it. Because, of course, if United keep regressing, the valuation of the club is also going to decrease at the same time. And billionaires don't like waste. The one thing about billionaires I've learned, they don't like wasting money. They don't like losing money, certainly. So it's going to be really intriguing. And rivals are the ones I'm really focusing on here, because for years they've said they're not our problem. For years they've said the Glazers aren't the issue. But suddenly they're not upset that the Glazers are selling. United fans have got to ask themselves, why are our rivals not upset that the Glazers are leaving? Well, I'll tell you why they're not upset. Sorry, why are they not? Yeah, they're not upset because they know they know what the issue is. They know that the club's going to improve. So rivals, you can hold that one a little bit. You really, really can, because it's just funny to see. Because I've seen everyone else get bought, taken over by good people, and not us. And I'm so desperate for this to be good. I can't lie to you, Ben. I can't even stay professional. I'm so desperate for a good owner that's rich, that's going to invest the money in the right areas, bring in a proper team to run the football club and get us back to the peak of our powers. I want it so desperately. I really do.
Well, I think that's a key point. Fans will look at money and they'll get excited by money, and they'll assume naturally that a lot of that money will be spent on the team, and that will excite them if it's players and transfer windows that bring stars to Manchester United. And of course, that's normal and natural, but it's also very superficial. And any rich owner can come in, whether they're a sheikh or a billionaire businessman, and say, I'm the new Manchester United owner, I'm going to buy Mbappe, and guess what? Everybody will celebrate that ownership group. But the real proof in the pudding is over time. And the value buying Manchester United or Liverpool or Newcastle United or Chelsea is not only in the club, it's what you can use the club for. And that's why, obviously, if it's a sovereign wealth fund, the fan base will be divided, because part of that, as with Newcastle United, could be used for sports washing or tourism. But more importantly, and away from the politics, the value increase is in building a model. And I think that fans have to understand anyone that comes in at this point will be negotiating privately. After they're in, they will build a form of model. Not every model will be multi-club, but each in its own unique way will have an aspect that, yes, hopefully provides football success, but also protects the brand and the business moving forwards. And particularly in the Premier League, Manchester United's place in football dominance and in the football hierarchy, because lots of new players are starting to come through. Leicester won the Premier League. They still had a model. Newcastle United have got a model. They're trying to climb into a Champions League place. Suddenly there might be a big seven. That's a threat to Manchester United. And then if the Glazers, for example, realise that each season that goes by, if they continue with their current strategy, Manchester United might move backwards, perhaps not so significantly that they're 8th, 9th, 10th, but to the point where they're always teetering in and around the top four instead of being an automatic qualifier. The bottom line financially for not making the Champions League every single season and in the absence of a European Super League is massive. So whoever comes into Manchester United will see that challenge, and their solution to it, regardless of transfer windows and who they buy, will be over time creating some form of model, looking at how the club recruit, looking at who it partners with, looking at how it's structured, looking at revenue streams as well away from football, and generally modernizing the football club and connecting all parts of it. And that's what Todd Boehly is trying to do at Chelsea at the moment. And what's intriguing about that is that the very fabric of Manchester United will have to change. And therefore, again, trying to move away from the superficial. When people hear like Radcliffe and maybe David Beckham, or regardless, Beckham will partner with somebody in some capacity. Yes, that's wonderful to have somebody that knows the football club and he's got experience in developing a franchise, so he knows business too. But it's also important, if Manchester United to have long-term success, that they're not glib about this, that they don't try and make this a popularity contest, that whoever comes in thinks about the core areas that need improving at Manchester United. So even if the football team has some continuity, even if it improves with stars and everybody thinks that's why it succeeds, it's actually the foundational core and thus the model of Manchester United that needs to change and modernize. Otherwise, regardless of a good season here or there, or a good player here or there, or a high volume of spend here and there, over time, the club's just going to go round in mediocre circles, teetering on the edge of the top four, rather than returning to its dominance under Sir Alex Ferguson.
And Ben, I completely agree with you. And that's where, for me, when people say, well, the Glazers spent money in the last 10 years, a new billionaire is not going to change that. You're still going to spend money. I'm like, then it shows me that rival fans, and I get why they wouldn't have listened. But if you're going to talk about someone's club, do your research first. Man United fans have never bemoaned the amount of money we've spent on players and salaries. The amount. What we've moaned on is that it's been spent on terrible projects that have been chopped and changed every 18 months, that have dwindled away what Sir Alex Ferguson built over a 25-year period, which ironically, people say you can't get the Fergie era back at any club. You can. It just won't be with one singular manager. It'll be having a base core at your club and having a club project rather than a managerial project. The kind of the old-fashioned manager is now kind of the director of football at most football clubs, and you have a head coach. So you're absolutely right. I agree. That's probably why, for me, my preference is more Apple, more Amazon, because because the way that how successful those companies are, and they're striving for excellence within a business front. Now, that isn't to suggest that the potential owners from Dubai couldn't do that. I just don't know as much about them as an organization. But it is going to be right. It isn't just throwing money at the problem. It is building that infrastructure, building those systems, building those processes. But equally, you look at Newcastle, and people say, well, how comes they've turned it around so quickly compared to Chelsea's situation? And it's because it's where you start and where you come from. And I think that the players at Newcastle are already seeing the changing standards, the changing process, the seriousness now of the football club. It makes everybody up their games. I don't know about you, Ben, but I've certainly worked in places when I was younger where there was not a serious feel on the work floor. Maybe the owner or the manager weren't particularly serious or disciplined, and everyone got away with blue murder. People would take an hour and 20-minute lunch. People would take an extra coffee break. People wouldn't strive to be the best they could because there was no necessity to be. That's what I'm personally. It's really unsexy. No one really talks about this, even in the Glazer situation. They just speak about debt and dividends and money spent. And for me, it's more about the structure of the football club. And if that's right, we move forward. However, we're definitely not going to get that with the Glazers because we're nearly 20 years in and it hasn't happened. And I go back to my original point. This is more for the viewers. I don't think you're going to get someone part with £6 billion and then have to invest more and then just let it be run like a madhouse, personally. But we will see. Super chat here says, if you want to compete, we need the buy, not Apple. Apple has shareholders, and we will be subject to that. Need a sugar daddy. Well, Troy, as Ben has already very wonderfully explained, Dubai are an investment company. They would be looking for a return themselves. So, all intents and purposes, that your fear of Apple would exist with the Dubai owners as well, potentially. So, yeah, that would sit in all areas. Nabil here says Ben is clearly concerned since the Glazers will be out. Don't worry, Ben. We will have oil money too. Plus, we don't have to cook our books like Manchester City do. He goes on to say you're jealous, Ben. Nabil says you're jealous, Ben. I didn't hear any jealousy myself, but he says you're jealous.
I mean, jealous of what? I'm a Leicester fan. We've won the Premier League. We've got great owners, and we're not in the same conversation ownership-wise as a club like Manchester United. I'd love to see Manchester United return to their glory, but there has to be a plan. And I think that's my only concern in this process, that, as I said before, with Chelsea under the same group managing a sale, Rain Group, based out of New York, there had to be a very rigid sales pitch. And it was almost like tender, which we are more accustomed to speaking about when television rights are sold. And there were a series of different bid criteria. And not only did those involved have to show a proof of funds, and if you were funding the football club using a majority debt, it was frowned upon, but they also had to prove that they had a loose plan for things like stadium redevelopment, and they had to pledge investment. Now, what we don't know about Rain Group and Manchester United is exactly what percentage of that kind of formal process will be replicated. There'll be elements of it, clearly, as you would expect in any sale, and the same for Liverpool. But the key difference, to reiterate, is that the Glazers can, if they choose, just wash their hands of the football club. And if they choose to do that, then they can just take the highest price. Whereas with Chelsea, it wasn't only about who's got the highest number, it was about who is right for the football club. And still Rain Group will be doing their due diligence. Still Premier League will be doing exactly the same thing as well. So there will be a certain bar to safeguard Manchester United. But if you have 5 credible offers and Rain Group say, all 5 are great. This one wants a multi-club model. This one wants to change your name and location. This one wants you to play in sky blue. This one wants you to merge with Manchester City. Like, I'm exaggerating the extremes, and clearly some of these would have take back. Some of these would be impossible, but I'm just using it as a hypothetical. If you had 5 credible suitors that had relatively different but acceptable plans, however unpopular they may be with the fan base, then at that point, as long as they pass Premier League scrutiny and get cleared to come in, the Glazers, unlike Chelsea, who had to clear it with the UK government, who had to consult supporter groups, who had to do it very quickly, the Glazers could just say, great, we paid 790 million. You're all pretty good. This is the highest bid. We'll take the highest bid. Thank you very much. We'll pass the club over. The Premier League are okay with it. Off you go. So that's my only question mark here. And that's my only concern here. And I'm not saying it will play out in this manner, but this is where Rain Group and also fan groups are really important, because both those managing the sale and the Premier League and fan groups need to ensure as much transparency as possible if the process progresses, to make sure that we're not just clear on who's coming in, but we're also clear on what they're going to do. And that process of scrutiny will hopefully just stop a process whereby the Glazers might just cash in on the highest bidder.
Yeah, absolutely. They absolutely could. And that'll be an intriguing thing to watch and see. And there is still that fear. And I'm sure I know there are some United fans, KJ, that works on the terrace. He has that kind of frying pan to fireplace type feeling towards this as well. So I totally agree. Ben, I really do appreciate you coming on and giving us an update as things stand right now in the relation of the sale of Manchester United. Viewers, thank you very much for all tuning in, your super chats as well. Please hit the like button before you leave. We're live after Portugal's game and Brazil's game today, so make sure you stick around for the Football Terrace's match reactions to those World Cup games. Ben, until next time, take care of yourself, my friend. Viewers, take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see you all again very, very soon.